In a quiet valley, surrounded by misty hills, lay the peaceful village of Black Hollow. The cobbled streets wound between quaint wooden houses, their roofs softened by layers of moss. The village had an old-world charm, yet something about it felt like a secret waiting to be uncovered. Rena, a young journalist, arrived after receiving an anonymous letter. The message was simple: find the truth before it's too late. There was no name, no return address, only a sense of urgency. Intrigued, she set out to discover what lay beneath the surface of this quiet village. The villagers greeted her with warm smiles but guarded expressions. There was kindness in their voices, yet something unspoken lingered. She checked into the only inn in town, a cozy place run by Mrs. Eleanor, an elderly woman with kind eyes and a gentle presence. Over dinner, Rena asked softly, "Mrs. Eleanor, this village has such a unique atmosphere. Is there something special about it?" The older woman paused before responding, her voice soothing but firm. "Dear, every place has its stories. Just remember to stay indoors after dark, and no matter what you hear, keep your window closed." Though Mrs. Eleanor's words were comforting, they left Rena wondering. That night, she lay in bed, listening to the peaceful silence outside. But as the clock neared midnight, a faint whisper floated through the air, almost like a song carried by the breeze. The words were too soft to understand, but their presence was unmistakable. Curious, she sat up and looked toward the window. The fog outside seemed to move in slow waves, wrapping around the village like a protective veil. A shadow flickered past, too swift to be a villager, too silent to be an animal. Her heart fluttered, but she reminded herself that it could just be her imagination. She reached for her camera to record the moment. As she watched the screen, a faint movement appeared, not outside but behind her. Turning swiftly, she found nothing but the familiar comfort of her room. Everything was just as it had been. Taking a deep breath, she set her camera down and pulled the blankets around her. Perhaps she was just tired. As her eyes began to close, a gentle voice, barely more than a breath, drifted through the night air. "It's not too late to leave." Rena's eyes opened wide, her heartbeat steady yet alert. The room remained calm, wrapped in the quiet of the night. With a small sigh, she closed her eyes once more, letting sleep take over. Morning arrived with a gentle glow, the golden sunlight filtering softly through the thin veil of mist that still clung to the village. Rena opened her eyes, letting the warmth of the light chase away the lingering unease from the night before. The whispers, so faint, so delicate, had been real, hadn't they? Or had it all been a trick of the wind, as Mrs. Eleanor had suggested? With a slow, steady breath, she sat up and stretched. The wooden floor beneath her feet was cool as she walked toward the window. Outside, Black Hollow was stirring to life. A few villagers moved about, their steps unhurried, their voices calm. The mist curled lazily around the rooftops, reluctant to leave. It was as if the village itself was still waking from a dream. Downstairs, the scent of fresh bread and warm tea greeted her like a comforting embrace. Mrs. Eleanor stood behind the counter, arranging small plates of food for the morning guests. She turned with a smile as Rena approached. "Good morning, dear. I trust you slept well." Her voice was smooth, as if it could lull one into tranquility. Rena hesitated before nodding. "I think so, though I heard something strange last night." Mrs. Eleanor stirred a spoon through her tea, her expression kind yet unreadable. "The wind plays many tricks here, dear. Sometimes, it carries memories of things long past." Something about her words made Rena pause. "Memories?" she asked softly, sipping her tea. The older woman only smiled, as if there was nothing more to say. After finishing breakfast, Rena decided to explore more of the village. The cobbled streets felt timeless, and though the sun had risen higher, the mist still lingered at the edges, unwilling to fully retreat. As she wandered, she noticed how quiet Black Hollow truly was. There was no rush, no loud voices, only the occasional sound of footsteps against stone and the distant rustling of leaves. A small bookshop caught her eye. Its wooden sign creaked gently in the breeze. Inside, the scent of old paper and polished wood filled the air. An elderly man sat behind the counter, flipping through a worn book. He looked up as she entered, his round glasses catching the light. "Ah, a visitor. How rare," he mused, his voice calm and welcoming. "Are you looking for something special?" Rena smiled politely. "Just exploring. This village has such a unique atmosphere." The man nodded knowingly. Black Hollow holds many stories. Some say the mist remembers. She tilted her head slightly. "Remembers what?" He closed the book gently, his fingers resting on its aged cover. "Voices that once were. Footsteps of those long gone." A soft chill brushed her skin, though the shop was warm. "Have you ever heard them?" she asked carefully. The man's smile faded just slightly. "Once," he admitted. "But it's best not to listen too closely." As she stepped back outside, Rena tried to shake the feeling that something unseen was watching her. Then, as she turned a corner, she heard it. Soft footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Just behind her. She turned swiftly, expecting to see another villager. But the street was empty. The mist curled at her feet, whispering secrets only it could understand. Rena stood still in the middle of the cobbled street, her eyes cautiously scanning her surroundings. The air in Black Hollow felt cooler, and the mist drifting slowly seemed denser than before. She swallowed hard, trying to ignore the strange feeling creeping into her mind. Those footsteps, could they have just been the echoes of her own? She took a deep breath and continued walking. The small shops along the road were quiet, with only an occasional villager passing by, nodding politely before returning to their tasks. Though this village was peaceful, there was a kind of silence that felt different, as if the whole place was waiting for something. At the end of the road, Rena saw an old house with a small yard overgrown with wildflowers. Its wooden fence was slightly worn, and the windows were tightly shut. Something about the house caught her attention, as if it held an untold story. "That place has been empty for a long time." A deep voice startled Rena slightly. She turned and saw the elderly bookstore keeper she had met earlier standing not far from her, holding a thick book with a worn-out cover. His face was calm, but there was a hint of caution in his eyes. "Abandoned?" Rena asked, her voice quieter than she intended. The old man nodded. "The owner disappeared years ago. No one knows what really happened. Some say they've seen shadows behind the curtains, even though the house is empty." A chill ran down Rena's spine. She didn't believe in such stories, but something inside her told her this village held more secrets than it appeared. After thanking the old man, Rena continued walking, leaving the house behind. However, as she walked away, she felt an eerie sensation, as if something was watching her from behind the windows. But when she turned back, all she saw were the still, unmoving curtains. Night fell quickly, and by the time Rena returned to the inn, the mist had grown even thicker. She tried not to think about the old house, but its shadow lingered in her mind. As she lay on her bed, staring at the dimly lit ceiling, the silence of the room surrounded her. It was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Then, just as her eyes began to close, the sound came again. Soft. Whispering. Almost like the wind slipping through the window crevices. Her name. Called gently. So close. Rena's eyes snapped open, her heart pounding. Was it just a dream? Or was something standing in the room with her? The night was long and restless. Rena lay still in her bed, her breathing shallow, ears straining to catch any sound beyond the gentle rustling of the wind outside. The whisper had felt too real, too close. She tried to convince herself it was only her mind playing tricks on her, but deep down she wasn't sure. Morning came draped in a heavy mist, the pale sunlight struggling to break through. Rena hesitated before stepping out of her room. The corridors of the inn were quiet, the wooden floor creaking softly beneath her feet as she made her way downstairs. The air smelled of fresh bread and brewed tea, comforting scents that almost made her forget the unease of the previous night. The innkeeper greeted her with a warm smile, placing a cup of tea before her as she sat at a small wooden table near the window. "Did you sleep well?" the woman asked kindly. Rena hesitated before answering. I think so." She forced a smile, not wanting to seem foolish. "I just had a strange dream, that's all." The innkeeper's expression darkened slightly. "Strange dreams are common here," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Some say the mist carries memories and voices." Rena felt a chill crawl down her spine. "Voices?" she repeated, gripping her cup a little tighter. The woman nodded slowly, her gaze distant. "People hear things in the night. Some say it's just the wind, others, they're not so sure." Rena swallowed hard, her tea suddenly tasting bitter. She wanted to ask more, but the innkeeper turned away, tending to other guests as if she had already said too much. After breakfast, Rena decided to explore more of the village. She walked along the stone-paved paths, her boots making soft echoes in the quiet streets. The mist had not lifted, and everything around her felt slightly blurred, as if the village itself was lost in a dream. She found herself standing before the old abandoned house once again. The wooden fence seemed even more worn in the daylight, its edges softened by years of neglect. She wasn't sure why she had come back, but something about the place pulled at her, a quiet invitation she couldn't ignore. Summoning her courage, Rena stepped closer, pushing the creaky gate open. The sound echoed in the stillness, and for a moment, she felt as if the entire village was holding its breath. Then, from deep within the house, she heard it. A whisper. Faint but unmistakable. Calling her name. Rena froze, her breath caught in her throat. The whisper was faint, almost carried away by the mist, but she had heard it clearly. Her name. Called from within the old house. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the wooden gate. Her heart pounded as she stepped forward, the creaky floorboards groaning beneath her weight. The door was slightly ajar, swaying gently with the wind. Taking a deep breath, she pushed it open. The inside was dim, dust motes floating in the slivers of pale light filtering through the windows. Old furniture sat untouched, draped in white sheets like forgotten ghosts. The air smelled of aged wood and something else, something faintly sweet like dried flowers. Rena took slow steps, her pulse quickening. The house was silent, yet it felt as if it was waiting. She followed the sensation, moving deeper into the hallway until she reached a door at the end. A soft creak sounded behind her. She turned sharply, but nothing moved. Just shadows stretching along the walls, shifting gently with the movement of the mist outside. Summoning her courage, she reached for the door handle and pushed. The room inside was small, with a single wooden chair and a dusty mirror hanging on the opposite wall. But it wasn't the furniture that held her gaze. It was the figure reflected in the mirror. A girl. With long dark hair and sad, knowing eyes. Rena's breath trembled. She turned swiftly, but the room was empty. Only the mirror remained, its surface smooth and still. Then, the whisper returned. This time it was softer, almost like a sigh. "Thank you." A wave of calmness washed over Rena. Somehow, she understood. The presence, the voice, it had been waiting. Not to harm, but to be heard. A memory, lingering in the mist, finally finding peace. Slowly, she stepped back, offering the room one last glance before closing the door gently. As she made her way out of the house, the air felt lighter, the mist beginning to lift. Back on the cobbled street, she took a deep breath, letting the crisp morning air fill her lungs. The village felt different now. Warmer. As if something unseen had finally been set free. With one last look at the house, Rena smiled softly and turned away, her footsteps light as she walked toward the rising sun.